Are we good, Mandy?
Yes, we are. Everyone's coming in. Everyone's been muted upon entry.
Does it show you have a couple left to allow in, or is everyone in, you think?
I will keep my eye on the waiting room, allowing anyone else in, but it looks like we have two that are just.
Are we good, Mandy?
Yes, we are. Everyone's coming in.
Uh-oh, echoes. All right, let's get started. Welcome everyone to the Community Justice Council meeting of the whole. I think we have a really good attendance today, and I'm very happy for that. We were remarking before we came in what would we do with at least having an ability to have Zoom meetings. Everything would be by phone and it would not be pleasant. We're grateful for everyone's attendance here today, and I am hopeful that you are all keeping well and healthy during this time of the pandemic. We know that the numbers are going in the wrong direction, so we're hopeful that you're keeping safe. I'm just going to do a quick executive committee check-in roll call. I have what I believe to be from the mayor's office, Jordan Primikow. I have John Chisholm, district attorney's office. I have Connie Kostelek from the Medical College of Wisconsin, two from the U.S. Attorney's Office, Eastern District, Ken Gales and Caballero. Sheriff Lucas is joining us. Tom Reed from Public Defender's Office, Neil Thorson from the Department of Corrections. And I also believe I have an appointed Superintendent Chantel Jewell from the House of Corrections, who is here today, and she will be awaiting confirmation in front of the county board. Please join us as well, and congratulations. Additional named council members, I believe we have Pete Konechny from the Legal Aid Society, and from the Milwaukee County Law Enforcement Executive Association, Bill Jessup, and myself. So again, welcome. Mandy, anybody else join us from the exec or as a full council member that you can tell?
Not at this time. Thank you.
Thank you, Mandy. All right, we put together a robust agenda, so we're going to get to it right away so that at the end we do have time for some questions and answer session and any announcements. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to District Attorney John Chisholm for his presentation on the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office dashboards. John, thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Judge, and good morning to everybody. I hope everyone is staying safe and staying healthy. The presentation today is actually what I would call a follow-up or a continuation of the commitment I made. It's hard to believe it was in the fall of 2019. It seems much longer ago, but at that time, at our community meeting at the Bader Foundation, we had a presentation from Professor Don Steeman from Loyola University and Brandon DuPont, who works part-time for the District Attorney's Office and part-time for the Medical College of Wisconsin as a super talented data person that is helping us actually synthesize and present some of the information that comes out of the work that's been done over the years to evaluate the processes in the Milwaukee DA's office on a whole range of issues. One of the commitments I made back then was that we would have a public-facing dashboard that would start looking and presenting some areas of I would hope, interest, but I would also say that that this is a work in progress. In other words, the information is intended to be responsive to questions that may arise from the community itself, and it gives us the opportunity to actually look at specific areas and then present information in a timely way. That's the great advantage of this dashboard. Is in the past we've certainly taken advantage and been grateful for the collaboration with outside academic partners who have evaluated our performance in a number of areas, particularly related to the area of race and prosecution. But what generally happens is that data is sometimes a couple years old by the time it's actually presented. The advantage of the dashboard is that our hope is to keep this fresh and up to date so that we can actually track trends and be more responsive. And I'll give you a practical example of how it's beneficial. We just had our budget hearing in front of the county board, the finance committee last week, and a number of really thoughtful questions were raised asking about specific practices or what kind of results we get in certain areas of prosecution. And I was able to literally contact Brandon that same afternoon, and by the next day or so we had a report that we were able to follow up with the county board that following week. And so it's that kind of responsiveness that I deeply appreciate. I continue to work with Don Steeman and Loyola University. We're working in conjunction with 3 other major DA's offices, obviously Cook County in Chicago and 2 jurisdictions in Florida. We anticipate that's going to expand. We presented last month in a forum to a number of other jurisdictions, and I think there are a lot of jurisdictions that have an interest in doing something similar to this. So that's it. That's our commitment, is to be transparent and to try to be accountable on issues of concern to the community. So I just encourage you to check out the dashboard, and if there are things that you want to see, please just let Mandy know, and we'll work on getting that information up on a dashboard. So with that, I'd like to just turn it over to Brandon for a moment. Again, I'm just really grateful for the talent that Brandon has brought to this project and to many other projects, both for us and the Medical College of Wisconsin. But I know many of you are familiar with them. But Brandon, if you'd be willing just to kind of walk people through the dashboard, and then if people had any general questions about how the data is used, Don's available as well. So thank you.
Okay. All right. So I will go ahead and try to share my screen. And Mandy, it looks like I'm not able to do that.
Give me just a moment, Brandon, and I'll make sure that you have. Okay, go ahead and give it a try.
All right, thank you so much. All right, I just want to confirm everyone can see this. Okay.
Great.
All right. Well, thank you, John, for the really great introduction, and Mandy as well. This is the current iteration that we have of Milwaukee County District Attorney Dashboard. The first thing I'd like to point you to is this kind of banner on the top, which is basically what John said, is that, this is a work in progress and this is an ongoing commitment. So if you have any feedback, questions, or you want to request some aggregate data, we have 2 links. So if you do have feedback, additional data analysis, or ask questions about the site, I think John says Mandy is always a touch point for a lot of these questions, but you also have a form that you can fill out if you want to send that in a structured way, and we'll work to get back to you within a week or so. Also, if you're looking to get at the data underlying a lot of the charts that are found on the site, you can go here. It'll take you to a unified source where you can get like the underlying, essentially, so you can think of them as spreadsheets for the information. So the overall dashboard is the first sort of data you'll see is bundled into sort of 4 indicators that our office put together that we think are really important around race and ethnicity of diversion and deferred prosecution, our ability to identify dismissible felony and misdemeanor cases at filing, the time it takes, which has improved pretty dramatically over time, to contact with victims. And this is sort of a broad system-wide goal to safely reduce the over-reliance on the jail. This is sort of one way you can look at this. It's an indicator, and it looks at Milwaukee County jail sentences over time, and you can see it's dropped precipitously. So I don't know, Don, if you want to jump in and talk specifically about any of these indicators or maybe provide context about felony cases at filing. Otherwise, I can go through some of the other sections of this report.
Sorry, I couldn't unmute myself. No, I think go ahead, Brandon, because I think there's a lot of data to show on the other pages that I think is worth taking a look at before I would jump in.
Okay, great. So the next section of this dashboard is broken into what you can consider sort of like standard metrics about the system. So to begin with, we have referrals, charging, disposition, and sentencing. We expect over time to add additional reports at these individual justice system points based on sort of what we've identified internally as what we can do for next steps. But again, if you have anything you'd like to see added to an additional report, things like, maybe case processing or bail, that's the type of feedback we're looking for. And then you can also add feedback to an individual report. So you'll see that most categories are going to look like this. They'll give you, so this is referrals. So this is, so when a referral comes to the office, it's when a law enforcement presents an individual suspected of a crime to review for potential charges. And you can see that we have kind of a high level overview table, which will give you a sense of how many year to date. And you can see, when was this last updated? Most of the data on the site will be updated every month with a month lag. So the next update will occur at the end of this month, and it will be up to 9/31/2020. But this table is going to give you how many of these cases have come in year to date. How has that changed since last year? And what does that look like compared to a 5-year average over time? And then if you also want to look at how many referrals are coming in by year and month, by different law enforcement agencies, how that breaks down by month and by most serious offense, how that breaks down again by just offense, both yearly and monthly. And then, of course, we have a yearly demographic breakdown of what referrals to the Milwaukee County District Attorney's Office looks like. We anticipate, in addition to this report and a lot of these that are coming up, that we will do a more nuanced breakout of offense types to get at specific things like firearm offenses and how that changes over time as well. You'll see a very similar report design for charging. So as opposed to just referred cases, these are the number of cases that the district attorney decides to issue. Again, you have this very similar table that'll tell you year to date, how this has changed since last year, and how that compares to a 5-year average. we'll have charging over time, and you can again toggle between year and month, by agency, monthly, by offense type, and again, demographic breakdown. The last two reports are disposition. This is how a case is resolved in court. We're currently very close to getting access to bulk court data turned back on, where we'll be able to update these reports and they'll be as current as the referral and charging. We anticipate to figure this out in the next 2 weeks. But here you'll have information about yearly and monthly dispositions, dispositions by offense type. You can see that dispositions have dropped precipitously since this coronavirus, which is what we would expect. And then again, a demographic breakdown. Lastly, we do have sentencing. This is, again, we have a sort of a year-to-date report. And in this report, we currently don't have information about sentence length. Instead, what's happening here is we'll look at an individual case and assign whether or not it was a case that ended up in a sentence with local jail, which is typically a year or less incarceration, or state prison, which is typically more than a year. And then you also have custodial sentence, which is both local jail and state and prison. So you can see trends like this over time for both overall, offense type, and demographic breakdown. So if you have any questions about some of the terms that I've sort of brought up or that you see in the site, we do have a definitions page, which will hopefully add some clarity around this. If you still have questions, you can of course go back up here, provide feedback. Again, this is in sort of an iterative process, and we hope to continue to add and make this more understandable as we go on. The last thing I'll point to is something called data stories. So oftentimes the data that might be of interest or requested doesn't fit into a standard bucket, but might be a more nuanced understanding, like how is the office handling auto theft cases, for instance, or felony gun cases. And in that instance, we have the opportunity to specifically tell an individual data story. Currently, we only have a introduction by DA John Chisholm, but we're hoping as we get maybe a specific request around a specific issue to be able to add that into this report section as we get them. So again, this is the Milwaukee DA dashboard. We're hoping to improve and add to this over time, and we really welcome any feedback that anyone has.
Brandon, there's a couple questions in the chat.
Yeah.
Are you able to see those?
Yes, I can go to the chat now. I just wanted to check in. Do you want me to answer those now, or is that for the end of the meeting?
I think we should do it now, because otherwise we'll go into a whole different presentation with Connie, and
Yeah,
how we do it now.
makes sense. Okay, so this is encompass both the adult and juvenile criminal legal systems. Currently, this is only adult cases. One of the things that we've identified internally is a need to add additional information about juvenile criminal legal systems. So that has been added as something we're working to add to the site in the future, but great question. We are able to separate some of this information for some of the reports out by domestic violence cases to add additional context. One of the things that I mentioned when I was going through this report was that another sort of identified next step would be to do a more specific breakdown on offense types outside of the current felony misdemeanor breakdown that we have right now. So that will be included moving forward. And then to the same point, charging data broken down by charge. Yes. That is, again, something we're working to break out. If there are specific charge types or charge categories you would like to see, feel free to, again, fill out that form, and we'll make it a point to make sure that's added to the report. And then, so all this data broken out to show the differences between men and women. That is also a potential design consideration we can take into account in this report. One of the things is it's always, a balance between showing sort of general information and allowing just like a ton of interactivity. But that is something we can add in and do a more nuanced report on sort of gender breakdown. If there's a specific issue you would like to be looked into, that's something we could fit under the data stories. If you'd like to talk about like what is sort of the like 4 or 5 main differences that we see with men and women in the Milwaukee County criminal justice system. And then, are you planning to add data reflecting the change in expenditures related to decreased reliance on incarceration? So this is an interesting and sort of complex question. I think it's an important one, right? So that could potentially be a data story at one time if we're talking about this in terms of justice reinvestment, and how some of the alternatives to incarceration strategies have sort of reduced costs in the system and may be eligible for reinvestment other way. But again, I think that should be done in feedback, with the council, and might make for a good data story. And then to Andrew's point, we can also add considerations to include not just numbers, but also percentage of diversions. One of the balances we were trying to strike with this data to first and foremost provide the counts. So if you wanted to calculate the percentages yourself, you absolutely could. But as we move forward, if that's something that individuals would really find helpful, is the ability to see sort of percentages and additional calculations, we can work to add that. And then specific to Vanessa Vararama's question is, OVP would really be interested in data specific to DV and gun violence. So I would put that under the work of breaking out some of these reports by charge and offense types, and I can make sure to add DV and gun violence bucket to that. I think I got all of the questions. I'm just going to copy and paste this in group chat so to make sure I have everything.
Great job, Brandon. Any other questions? Make sure you put them in the chat and then we can get them answered. John, anything further or from Don?
No, the questions were excellent. And that's frankly what we're hoping for, is just that level of interest. And it helps us in terms of trying to explain some of the dynamics that we confront every day. I think everybody is acutely aware, as we're going to talk soon with Connie, about what I've referred to as sort of the engine lights flashing red in Milwaukee County right now with respect to our homicides. We are on pace to break our all-time record in homicides, both for the city and for the county. We are well over 600 non-fatal shootings. Our overdose deaths are off the chart. Our suicides are extraordinarily elevated. Deep concerns about what's going on with family violence issues. So all of these dynamics are in the context of an extraordinarily challenging public health crisis. You may also even argue that there's a political crisis occurring at the same time. And so all of these things combined together, I just feel more strongly than ever that without timely, effective information to inform our strategies, and those strategies have to be also deeply informed by the people who are most impacted, and they have to be equipped with the same information everyone else has, so that they can help us steer our community's response to this in a way that does not over rely on the criminal justice system. There's a time and a place for us, but I think moving forward, we want these strategies to be deeply informed and guided by the community as well. And this is just one way of giving people in the community the kind of information they need to help inform their participation and guidance of our strategies to address the problems in our community. So thank you.
Thank you, John. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Don. Much appreciated. And I think that's a great segue into our next presentation from Connie Kostelak and Mike Todorat is from the Medical College concerning the Milwaukee Homicide Review Commission dashboards and reports. Connie, you there?
I'm here. Thank you so much, Judge. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now as well. And it's really good to be on with everyone today. And as I'll just reiterate what John was indicating, that this has been such an unprecedented time in so many respects. And I think what we're all trying to do is look at ways that we can bring data and information together to help as we all work to build strategies on how to address the myriad of challenges that we're all facing within the community at the current time. So, but I'm really glad to be here with all of you today. And it was, I think, last fall as well that we talked about the homicide and non-fatal shooting dashboards. So really glad to be back to talk to you a little bit more about the fact that these are out and available now. But similar to what you just heard from John and Brandon, this is really a first iteration of these dashboards as well, and we really are encouraging input. These are only going to be valuable if they're useful for the community and for stakeholders, and the more feedback we can get, the better we can do at adding additional information and improving the site as we go along. So these are actually located, and Andrew, if you wouldn't mind maybe putting the link in the chat again, as you did with the district attorney dashboards, but these are located on the Homicide Review Commission page on the Medical College website. And similar to what Brandon was just showing, we also have a feedback and suggestion link here as well. So you are more than welcome to reach out to any of us directly on the Homicide Review Commission, or to reach out to Mandy, but you certainly can also use this link to provide feedback or input on what is on the dashboards currently, as well as what we can add to make them more useful going forward. I do want to make sure that I just orient you a little bit to what is on these particular pages of the dashboard, and make sure that you have a sense of what's there. So hopefully you can go in and utilize the data that's there. And as I said, also come back to us with additional questions or suggestions. So this one is set up a little bit differently than what you just saw from Brandon. There's essentially 3 tabs across the top that indicate the different types of information that you can review. The one that you land on is the time trend, and this really has information to give you some flexibility to look at things over time. So you've got total victim counts by year and type of offense, so breaking it into essentially non-fatal shootings, homicides with and without a firearm. You have similar information then by month, as well as for calendar year to date comparison. And this is where you can see, as John indicated, that 2020 is on pace right now to be a record year. And if you look at it, even just compared to the last 10 years, what we've seen year to date, and this right now is through the beginning of October for the data, you can see that there's been a substantial increase in the number of both homicides and non-fatal shootings. With all of these different visualizations that are on the dashboard, for each one, there is a hover that gives you some additional information to help give some context to what's included on that particular chart or graph. But then when you hover over the bars, you also will get additional information. So for this one, for example, for year to date, if you hover over the bar, you will get the number of offenses for the current time period and the percent change from the prior year. So you can see that for non-fatal shootings through the beginning of October, and unfortunately this trend has not slowed, there was an increase of about 70% in non-fatal shooting victims and an increase of over 100% in homicide victims. And that trend is very similar through almost the end of October. You do also on each of these have some flexibility in terms of being able to filter or query the data. So right now, for example, the victims by month is a collective time period count for all the years that are being displayed. But if you go in, you can make a change to look at just 2020. So if you want to look at what's been happening on a monthly basis, you have the ability to narrow down what you are looking at to be able to get a little bit more detail. So in this case, you can see that our trend over the year so far, when we look at it compared to last year, almost every month has been up, but the most dramatic months have been June, July, August, and September in terms of the increases in homicides and non-fatal shootings so far this year. So I'm not going to go through each and every chart in detail, but please know that all of the characteristics that I have just explained in terms of being able to hover over to get additional detail, and the filters really do apply on each of the charts. So you have some flexibility in what you can look at and how you can dig further into the data to hopefully answer questions. And in some cases, raise more questions, which is part of the value of being able to look at data in different ways. When we move to the second tab, you have demographic information. And this is where you have a breakdown for race, ethnicity, for sex, and then for age ranges when we're looking at both victims and suspects of homicides and non-fatal shootings. When you come onto the page initially, it is a combination of homicides and non-fatal shootings. But again, just as we saw on the other page, you can filter it. So if you're particularly interested in looking at just the characteristics of homicide victims, and you're interested in a particular time period, you can make a selection on the page that will narrow down what you're looking at and give you some flexibility to work through this data in different ways. And again, if you hover over, you'll get a little bit more detail so that you can see both the raw numbers and the percentages, and also have some explanation of what each of these charts are displaying. Some are a little more straightforward than others. So the victim count is essentially a count of the victim information, but something like relationships is a little bit more nuanced. And so it's good to take the time to make sure that you're clear on what it's counting, how the information is being collected. We tried to be very detailed in that, but if you are looking at the information and you have questions that are not answered, by all means, let us know. One of the things we want to be very clear about is what is included and not included in the data to make sure that there are not misinterpretations or misunderstandings about what the data is showing. So on this page, you have that demographic information, you have relationship between the victim and the suspect, and then you also have the manner of death or injury, which, as you can see, the majority of our homicides so far this year have involved a firearm of some type, with most of those being a handgun. This is also broken down by male or female, but you can see that overall that pattern stays essentially the same regardless of the sex of the individual involved. And then if we go to the community view, you on this particular page have some information about the primary factor related to the incidents. And again, you can look at this just for homicides or for non-fatal shootings or in combination and switch which years you are looking at. But then you also have the ability to look at the patterns in terms of where things are occurring geographically. So you have information by neighborhood that's displaying right now. And by hovering over particular neighborhoods, you can see what the counts are for that particular area, as well as the density per square mile, since not all of the neighborhoods are the same geographic size. But then you can also switch to look for how things are broken out by council district, by census block group, or by police district as well. So you can get an idea of the distribution based on different geographic parameters to understand what the concentration looks like in different areas. On all of these, you also do have a link to technical notes. So in addition to those hovers that I mentioned earlier, there is also a data notes page that gives you more detail on what the information contains, how things are defined, how things are counted. As many of you probably know, there's actually multiple ways to count and categorize homicide incidents, for example. So we wanted to be clear on what was being counted and how things were being categorized. It may differ from numbers that are published through other sources, given that whether you're counting the date of the death or you're counting the date that the incident occurred, and some specifics on whether you're including things like self-defense incidents can make a difference on which particular cases are included in the counts across different data sources. So all of that information is intended to provide at least some background and context to what is included on the dashboard. We do also, similar to what Brandon pointed out on the DA dashboards, try to make it clear when the data was last updated and how current the incidents are. This information will be updated at least once a month. And what we're really looking to do is get feedback on how people are using what is on the site currently, and then make some determinations about where we get the most value from expanding the data and the information that's being displayed. This is, to a large extent, a way of making what were the static reports that were published on an annual basis to make those more accessible, more interactive. But we also will be continuing to do other types of reports. So I am going to pause for a minute and see if there's specific questions that are coming in the chat about the dashboard. And then I do want to show you a recent report that we put out related to domestic violence and intimate partner violence as well.
Connie, this is the chief. There's a question about socioeconomic status, and it's been answered by Andrew, but maybe if you could re-ask the question so that those who don't have the chat available to them may get the answer provided.
Sure, I am just...
Is there any way to collect or reflect data about socioeconomic status of individuals involved in incidents of interpersonal violence?
At the current time, that is not something that is collected related to the individual incidents. One of the ways that we can analyze that, and actually one of the things that you'll see, at least in part in the report that I'm going to show you in a minute, is at least being able to look at the concentration by geographic area and how it overlays with demographic characteristics and really the social determinants of health factors by geographic area. So even though we don't have it at the individual case level, there is some ability to look at where the incidents are concentrated relative to some of those factors as they vary across the community.
Thanks, Connie.
Yeah, are there other questions that are in
there's
the
one.
chat?
Are you considering expanding the scope of reporting to the county level?
We would really like to be able to expand it to the county level. We've actually got some overall work going on as part of the CJC dashboard work to look at overall crime at the county level. The challenge is we don't have as much detail as we do for the city of Milwaukee because of the collaboration with the Milwaukee Police Department. But we are working toward at least having some county level data. And I hope that over time, that's something that we can continue to expand. I think it's an important missing piece of understanding what's happening across the entire county.
Thank you.
All right. So if there aren't any other questions at the moment, I'm going to go ahead and switch over to the domestic violence and intimate partner violence report, just to make sure that everyone has a chance to see this as well. And actually, I think what I'm going to do is navigate from here. So when you're on the Homicide Review Commission page, if you go to, actually, before I do that, I want to point one other thing out that ties into talking about the DV and IPV. So on this particular page with the demographics with the filters, there's some additional filters included. We have essentially the ability to narrow down by primary factors. So you can look at one or more of the primary factors related to the incident, and then all of the demographic information will change to narrow down to that particular subset of incidents. Then there is also information, the ability to narrow it down by domestic violence and intimate partner violence, as well as whether the incident had a primary connection to some type of drug involvement. So you do have some additional factors that you can narrow by here, but then the domestic violence and intimate partner violence is somewhat complicated because those incidents, there's some definitional challenges on sometimes you can have an incident that is domestic violence and also intimate partner violence. And we wanted to do a bit of a deeper dive into those particular types of incidents. So Mike Tortoritis, who's the program manager, very glad to report he rejoined Homicide Review back in July. But Mike was the lead on this particular report, which is out on the Homicide Review webpage. So if you are on the dashboard, if you come up and click on data and reports, there's a variety of reports out here, and then there's a link to this domestic violence and intimate partner violence report. So we can also put a link to the report directly in the chat, and I'll do that when I'm done sharing here. But just wanted to make sure we showed you this report as another resource. And we will be doing additional publications like this, where we take a particular issue and delve into it in a little bit more depth and put something together that might not fit as well on a dashboard, but is a shorter snapshot that hopefully will be another resource for stakeholders and community members to use and understand what's happening. So I'm not going to spend a great deal of time on the detail of this report, but do know that this is a deeper dive into both homicides and non-fatal shootings for domestic violence and intimate partner violence. And in this case, there is the definition included for what IPV and DV represent, as well as how those are handled in combination with each other. So in this case, essentially, if a case was intimate partner violence and also domestic violence, it was counted as IPV. And then only if it did not meet the criteria for IPV was it counted as domestic violence. So in this case, looking at the combination of those really can give us a sense of these interpersonal situations, some of which do meet the statutory definition for domestic abuse and some of which do not, but are really those intimate partner or family related situations that we want to get a better handle on what's been happening with those. You can see that we did see an overall increase in particularly the percent of homicides that involved intimate partner violence or domestic violence. I think we've talked before that actually started back in 2019, where we saw an increase and has continued into the first part of 2020. We do plan to do an update. This is through essentially mid-July. We do plan to do an update of this report so that we can continue to track what happens through the end of this year. But you have a lot of the same information, but broken down specifically for those DV and IPV incidents. And I should probably make this a little bit larger on the screen so you can see what we're looking at. But this, in essence, is a time plot of what was occurring over really since the start of the pandemic through the end of July, and what we see in terms of trends with overall homicides and shootings, as well as with DV and IPV incidents in particular. And you can see there were certainly some spikes in particular periods, such as around the 4th of July. But you can see that overall we had some high volume of incidents really starting in somewhat throughout the year, but over those summer months were the high period, as we saw on the chart earlier. For comparison, this is also information about the COVID-19 cases in Milwaukee County during that same time period, which gives you an interesting juxtaposition of two of those really challenging situations happening within the community at the same time. So this report also contains some geographic breakdown information as well. So looking at where those incidents were concentrated for both 2018 and 2019. So you can get a sense of what was happening across the city for those DV and IPV incidents. And then it also does go into some demographic breakdowns. But one of the things I do want to point out, tying back to the question that was raised earlier, is there is some initial analysis on the connection between the DV and IPV rates across the city and how that is associated with at least some of the social determinants of health as some of the factors that really can contribute to domestic violence and intimate partner violence, as well as to overall outcomes within the community. And part of what we found, at least through this kind of early analysis, is that factors such as the percent of people that are unemployed, the percent living below the poverty line, and the percent with a high school diploma or GED, those were all significantly associated with the DV and IPV rates across the city. So we don't have to go into a lot of the technical details behind this at the moment, but hopefully this is another piece of information that will be valuable for understanding part of what we're seeing with the trends of these incidents in recent months. So I will stop there and see if there are other items in the chat or other items that I can address from the group today.
Connie, some of the questions in the chat have been answered by Andy, which has been very helpful. Anne McCullough asked, does the dashboard reflect juvenile data related to DV incidents? Girls often receive charges related to DV.
Yeah, this is not limited to adults only. So any incidents of domestic violence or intimate partner violence that meet that those definitions would be included in this data.
Okay. And then there's been a variety of questions around seeing the social determinants of health layered into this data and how that might be addressed. And again, I know Andrew's been answering these questions, but just a response from you, because I don't know if everyone has access to the chat.
Yeah, so I, and for some reason I'm having trouble pulling up the chat, so I apologize because I can't see it at the moment. When I click on it, is not coming up for me. I will stop actually sharing my screen for a minute and then I should be able to see it. So there definitely is a way to look at other risk factors and social determinants of health as it relates to the not just the intimate partner violence and domestic violence incidents, but to homicide and non-fatal shooting incidents as a whole. So those are actually a few of the additional analyses that we have planned for the upcoming months, is to take a closer look at both the overall patterns that we're seeing geographically by neighborhood, but how that also overlays with some of those social determinants of health and other factors that are typically associated with the patterns that we're seeing for these serious violence incidents. We're also going to take a closer look at the drug-related incidents. That's part of, I think, one of the questions, particularly with the high number of opioid overdose deaths and overall overdoses that we're seeing within the community, making sure that we have a good understanding of the connection between what's happening with those homicides and non-fatal shootings, as well as with the incidents for drug-related situations and how that may be contributing to what we're seeing across the city.
Great questions.
Absolutely.
That's what we want, right? Input from everybody.
Well, and I hope that part of what our presentations are going to do today is lead to everyone going back and taking a closer look at these dashboards and coming back to us with additional questions. As I said at the beginning, we really can only make this as useful for everyone as the feedback that we get. We certainly have ideas on what we think is most valuable, and we look at that from our own analytic and research perspective, but we want it to be really useful for the community as well. And only through your input can we make sure that we're meeting those needs. So I do want to make sure that I recognize that the CJC and the Homicide Review Executive Committee and the Milwaukee Police Department are really key partners in all of this work. And as we are continuing to do this expanded analysis, we'll make sure that we come back and update the CJC as part of our reporting out on things that we are examining and learning more about as we go forward. So
Thanks, Connie. One more question. Does this report also include call outcomes, arrests, connection to resources, etc.?
This particular one is really focused on just the homicides and the non-fatal shootings. So this one in particular does not include connection to resources per se, but it does, in the data, we do have the outcomes of the cases in terms of whether there was an arrest or whether there was a clearance for the case. So we have not incorporated that into the dashboard yet, but that is part of the information that we do capture and look at on a regular basis.
Wonderful. Yeah, so I'm grateful for the quality and the quantity of the data that we have coming from the medical college, as well as just the previous discussion we had with the district attorney's office about their data dashboards. They are invaluable in terms of trying to move forward on a response to what's going on in our community, as well as the input from the community itself. So very grateful for everyone's input. Just real quick, I'm going to ask Mandy to answer this question because I'm not sure. There was a question on whether this will ultimately be saved and live on YouTube for later use, these presentations. And I know Mandy was frozen, but I think she's back on.
Yes, I am struggling with a little bit of technical difficulty. So here I am now operating from my phone here. But yes, we will save the live stream so that it is accessible following the meeting.
Great. Thank you. Don't think I see other questions in the chat. I would acknowledge that Mayor Tom Barrett joined us in, I think, in the first presentation, as well as Jean Gerasi, the executive director from the Benedict Center. Okay, got it. Any other questions? Make sure you put them in the chat. I think we're moving into that phase of our meeting agenda, which is questions and answers and other announcements from those community organizations that are joining us here today. And I would have to say, the executive committee has been meeting as a whole executive, as well as in smaller group meetings, to have data reported out and to try to find a framework and a response moving forward. And we will keep you up to date on what we are continuing to do in that area. Other questions, other concerns?
Any executive committee member is welcome to add any announcements as well. I have lifted the ability so anyone can unmute themselves.
No worries. We're all for having only an hour Zoom meeting. I think there's Zoom fatigue that has set in across systems. So I think we had a really good report out today, and I'm appreciative of all those who are doing that. If there's no other questions, we will adjourn. I'll give about one more minute. Would you mind sharing some of the committee strategies for community engagement and partnership? And no worries about keeping us. We do have still 30 minutes. We can certainly talk. Mandy, do you want to report out on what the CJC is doing right now with community engagement work going forward?
Sure, I'm happy to. As we spoke at the last meeting, Milwaukee County and the CJC has been closely engaged in the work with the MacArthur Safety and Justice Challenge for the past number of years. As we discussed, really the three pillars of focus with that effort are focusing on how to safely reduce our over-reliance or unnecessary use on local jails, address racial and ethnic disparities within the criminal justice system, and really put forward an intentional, authentic effort to increase community engagement with criminal justice reform efforts. And so as part of that, we had a number of strategies that we had planned on rolling out in early 2020. And due to the pandemic, we are slightly behind schedule on some of those, but I will go through some of the things that we are focusing on and hope to release in the near future. First, we are partnering with an organization called Everyday Democracy, and we're exploring opportunities to increase our level of community engagement, be it adjusting meeting times, finding different avenues so that more community members can be involved in different ways a part of meetings, as well as different learning opportunities and listening opportunities so that there is shared development of criminal justice reform priorities here within Milwaukee County. Additionally, as part of an award, a grant award that the county and the CJC received, we're taking over half of our community engagement dollars and plan to roll out community level sub-grants in the next few months. We're partnering with the Greater Milwaukee Foundation for the ease of being able for small nonprofits to apply for funds that will really help uplift some of the priorities that I had just mentioned, as well as priorities identified within the Blueprint for Peace. We really want this to be a collaborative effort and a way for community organizations to receive funds that are really intended to be used in the community, because we recognize that oftentimes the community organizations that are doing the work on the ground have some of the best and most innovative solutions. So I say all of that just as kind of a cursory overview. The other piece of this that we had received as a suggestion from some of our other partners was to create a criminal justice learning series to allow for more dialogue like we had today on specific decision points within the criminal justice system. Ironically, we rolled that criminal justice learning series out on March 9th, which was, as many of us remember, about a week prior to everything being shut down. We have discussed rolling that back out virtually. My intention is to send out a survey, as we do with all of these meetings, following, and including that actually as one of the survey questions, if that is of interest to community members to participate and have additional virtual dialogues with key decision makers within the justice system. So there can be a two-way dialogue as well as mutual learning. We're open to suggestions on how to go about doing that. I think I just saw in the corner of my tiny iPhone screen here, Judge Trajano's mention of sending an email. Please know that my email is always open for suggestions and ideas. We really welcome community input. I talk frequently with my national colleagues and talk about the difference between Milwaukee's Community Justice Council versus the National Criminal Justice Coordinating Councils. And we were created with the word community in the title because community engagement is very important to all of us, all of the leadership, as well as all the staff and members. So please feel free to reach out to me at any point, and I'm happy to talk a bit more about ways that we can all work together in advancing justice initiatives here in Milwaukee County.
Okay, anything else? I think we're going to make a rule that you all have to show your faces if you're coming into Zoom, because I miss seeing you all in person. All I see is names, and I know you're eating breakfast and hopefully you're comfortable in your homes, but again, I appreciate everyone's input. Kelly Hedge was waving. Hey, Kelly. I only get a couple screens on it each time, so I'm scrolling through, but again, thank you everybody for being here today, and please keep safe. We're certainly going in the wrong direction with the numbers, and we care about each one of you. So take care of yourselves, and we will prepare for our next meeting with you coming up and have more thoughts and ideas for action.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Tom.
Bye-bye.
Thank you, Judge.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank
Mandy
you.
and Tom, you want to stay on, John, if you want, John Chisholm.
One second here.
Carl.
A Zoom conference. Hold on. Can I just give you a call right back? Okay.